All right, guys, we have systematically, completely dismantled the 9600 BC dating of the Atlantis because it is riddled with chronological errors, and we're going to do the same thing in this video for an entirely different false paradigm that has millions of people buying into it. Very persuasive personalities are involved. Lucrative is this franchise or system of franchises that promotes this idea. Zechariah Sitchin in the Earth Chronicles series promoted this idea that the Babylonian, Akkadian, and Sumerian cuneiform text actually refers to periods of time of hundreds of thousands of years. I'm going to systematically dismantle that idea with multitudes of sources. This chart has enough data to completely nullify that premise. But we're going to wait to the very end of this video to even address the data on this chart. I have about 400 meticulous chronological charts. You can find many of them in the links below, where I demonstrate that the ancients were aware of a 12th century period leading up to a major cataclysm, and that this 12th century period was exactly 432,000 turnings of the stars. These are SHARs. It is the Sky Watcher's unit of measurement in antiquity when the stars rotate a single time around the Eye of the Dragon, or Alpha Draconis. This is why 3 Bactans of the Mayan long count also equal precisely 432,000 SHARs. This video merely serves to correct the chronological disinformation. This is not a treatise nor an attack against the Sumerian, Akkadian, and other Near Eastern cuneiform texts and what they convey about the history of the Anunna, the Igigi, the later Babylonianized version called the Anunnaki. This is not an attack on the historicity of the text and what they convey. So without further ado, let's get deep into it.
So I'm 17,987 turnings of the stars old. But when we read Sumerian text, this is what you see all the time. You can supplant turnings of the stars to SHARs. Because remember, I told you guys, I don't tell you this data, I show it to you. And in prior presentations, I've cited the sources that you can go find for yourself, or Sumerologists have already concluded that SHAR, before Zechariah Sitchin was even born, Sumerologists had already determined that SHAR was a unit of measurement and had nothing to do with the word year. Zechariah Sitchin did that, and he followed the example of Berosus, because Berosus was a Babylonian astronomer, but he was Greek, and he was almost 18 centuries after the Chaldeans collapsed. So even he didn't know what he was talking about, because 300 years before him, we have historical references to the actual day count systems. And to criticisms of Solon, who came out talking about the Egyptians were fantastically ancient, and the scholars of the day criticized that, like Eudoxus. So now you don't know what you're talking about. Diodorus Siculus, they said it clearly. The ancients counted the moons, they counted the days, they had no systems to factor years. Therefore, when Berosus spoke that the gods appeared before the flood, from his perspective, in 280 BC, he specifically said it was 450,000 SHARs ago, which is a ridiculous amount. This is the Billy Carson, Zechariah Sitchin, fantastic tooth under your pillow fairy tale version of history. It's BS. That 450,000 SHARs is turnings of the stars, which completely abbreviates that time all the way to 1,250 years. Yes, that's exactly 50 years before the appearance of Enki, who we could know of as Enoch, in 3439 BC, a date that I have shown in charts and in chronological formula so many times throughout my channel that if you don't already know that, then you're just not a part of the conversation. This is the signal first year of civilization recorded around the world. 3439 BC. 35th century BC is when everything started. It's when the long-spanning Neolithic period of humans in basic inactivity, doing nothing, suddenly blew up within 100 years, building urban centers, infrastructures with canal works and quays and vast docking systems, huge mariner race cities that could support 100 ships. I'm talking about, this is 100 years for which even our archaeologists and anthropologists are astonished. They don't understand. Human writing, mathematics, geometry, agriculture, all kinds of agrarian studies, everything just blew up in that 1 century. Where did it come from? But in the 450,000 years of Berosus, that's exactly where it came from. He said the gods appeared 450,000 SHARs ago. There it is. Was SHAR, 450,000 SHARs before the flood. There it is. I've already showed you guys the 432,000 years of the Sumerian texts. From the appearance of the gods to the Great Flood is only 12 centuries. It's the luna-solar calendar. It's the days, turnings of the stars. The ancients counted the stars every time they went around the eye of the dragon. The dragon was Alpha Draconis in the sky. It's the circumpolar sky. It's the circumpolar constellation in the north. The dragon is close to the pole star, so close that his eye was Alpha Draconis. It's the only star in the ancient Vapor Canopy world that did not move, because the other constellations moved around it. And every day, they counted the rotations of the tail of the dragon, and the tail of the dragon would tell them when a new day had started. And they counted those because the years were unknown. In all ancient manuscripts across the board, I have shown you in the Archaics presentations that the years were unknown to ancient cultures. They didn't factor them, didn't care. It was the days. Later, it became the months. Then it was the years only after the vapor canopy fell and the sun was clearly visible in the sky. So there are hundreds of calendrical references found in Ugaritic, in Rashameric, Hittite, Anatolian, Akkadian. I believe even there's a few in the Amarna cuneiform tablets of Egypt. Those are Canaanite tablets that were sent to Egypt asking for help from Pharaoh because a new race of people were invading the area. It is the background story to the true conquest of Canaan by the Amuru. But yeah, that's what the title of my video today is about. I'm 17,987 turnings of the stars old today. So when you see these large numbers in ancient text, all you do is divide them by the lunar-solar system. How many days, how many turnings of the stars tells you exactly how many years it's talking about. I'll give you an example. The first dynasty to resurrect from the ashes of Cataclysm after the flood, according to Near Eastern traditions, was Kish. After the Great Flood had destroyed the world, the dynasty of Kish was the first one to emerge in power as all these civilizations were struggling to repopulate and come back up. Now, the date assigned to that in the cuneiform doesn't make sense because it's in the tens of thousands. Well, when you divide that by the lunar solar year, it pulls all the way up to the date that Callisthenes provided to Alexander of Macedon after they had taken Babylon. Well, no, after they had taken Babylon, he had become Alexander the Great, and one of his history says that they were friends, but I kind of doubt that because Alexander had the man executed for being too glib, for basically expressing his anti-war opinion too many times. But Callisthenes, before he was executed, had gone through the Babylonian records, and he had informed Alexander that, hey, here's the tens of thousands of years of history, but Callisthenes instantly understood how to reckon the system. So the same text that we have about Callisthenes telling Alexander, well, when the Chaldeans and Babylon emerged after the Great Flood, it pulls up to 2233 BC. It was 1,903 years is the calculation Callisthenes come up with. And yet the text reads tens of thousands of SHARs. But the date that Callisthenes came up with was 1,903 years before this period. The period that he told Alexander, which in our calendar is 2233 BC. 2233 BC is 6 years after the Great Flood Cataclysm collapse of the Vapor Canopy caused by the Phoenix phenomenon. You can't make this stuff up, guys. This is what I'm talking about. I'm 17,987 turnings of the stars old. And if I was to take that same system, which means I'm 49 years old right now, if I was to take the same system and apply it to the ancient cuneiform tablets like it's supposed to be applied to and divide all those numbers by 360, then I'm going to get exactly the timelines that are presented. This is why I know that the Kish dynasty lasted not hundreds of thousands of years, but it lasted 108 years. This is how I know that Zechariah Sitchin's whole chronology completely falls apart. Therefore, if Zechariah Sitchin is the top of a pyramid promoting a whole entirely false version of history, then every single person that follows that same paradigm, like Billy Carson, is absolutely full of shit. Now, do they believe that 500,000 years ago, gods appeared, built cities, and then there was a great flood that was in our recent period, but those cities were actually begun 432,000 years ago, and that 7 kings ruled in the span of time of that 500,000 years, and the 7th king only died recently, 3,500 years ago, at the Great Flood? Oh my God, the suspension of disbelief is amazing. What these people can be made to believe is astonishing. I'm not willing to suspend my disbelief that much because the math don't lie. They're just applying it totally wrong. The 450,000 year SHARs of Berosus shows us, when we use the lunar solar system, that it just goes to 3439 BC, 50 years before that. And that's exactly what we find. Where's my charts? Do I have any charts available? Damn it. Y'all seen my charts. If you remember, the Nemesis X object appeared exactly 60 years before the appearance of Enki. Then it appeared in the same year Enki appeared, after 1/3 of the world's population died in massive earthquakes and flooding and fallout from the skies. So this 450,000 SHARs of Berosus nails it to the T, because he mentions this is when the gods appeared, and yet this answers for us a Sumerian mystery, because we have a whole collection of traditions that say Enki was the first, and this is when he arrived, and all that. But then we also have a collection of traditions that mention that there were already Anunna here before Enki showed up. Berosus's 450,000 SHARs answers that. Apparently there were two arrivals. Enki was the second. And I know some of you guys that follow Zechariah Sitchin can agree with that, because that's what Sitchin's position was too, that there was 2 or 3 arrivals of the Anunnaki, and that Enoch, Enki, was not the first. So he's just the one that played benefactor to the human race, meaning the other ones didn't help us build cities. The other ones didn't help us build infrastructure and canal works and duct and plumbing and agricultural increase. They didn't try any of that. It was Enki that did all that. I am Nancy. I'm almost 36,000 turnings of the stars old. All right. You know, 36,000 is twice 18,000. 18,000 is mentioned over and over and over in Akkadian cuneiform texts as a unit of measurement. So you kind of got me curious now. Kind of got me curious. So, okay, look at that. 18,000 days, SHARs, is found over and over. Even Zechariah Sitchin mentions that it was a unit of measurement in ancient Sumer. I have those notes. Guess what it is? 18,000 is 50 years. There it is. Now it kind of makes you wonder where the Judaic concept of a jubilee came from. It came from ancient Babylonia. There's no doubt.
Sitchin's books are good, and they cite real, actual archaeological finds and discoveries. But then the leap is made that what's come from underground had somehow derived from the Anunnaki from space. I am dumbfounded that my fellow supposedly free-thinking human brothers and sisters could believe these fictions about happenings hundreds of thousands of years ago. Here's a fact right here. There are no human writings found anywhere on Earth that date before 3500 BC. But what does that mean? It means that you believe that over 400,000 years passed with no written records until all of a sudden some people decided to record elaborate epics, transactions, rosters, king lists, syllabuses, star catalogs, and the histories of the gods that appeared 500,000 years earlier. That's what you believe. Now, because this is your belief, you are not a historian. You're a religionist, particularly a cultist. Now, if you're offended, let's explore this. Why should what I'm saying to you right now make you angry? If you're a follower of Sitchin, then many of you are mad as hell right now. You don't even know why, but I do. Your conscious mind has accepted a series of concepts as true, but your subconscious mind is at complete war with these conclusions. Anger is the result. It's an outward manifestation of internal conflict. I'm not attacking your belief that there were figures in ancient times called Anunna, who later in Babylon, after they had vanished, were called Anunnaki. I'm not attacking that. I'm not claiming this is untrue. I am not saying that these Anunna were not technologically advanced. I am not saying that the Sumerians did not regard these Anunna as gods. I'm not making these claims at all. I'm not arguing against that. I am not saying that everything Sitchin published is wrong. Calm down. I am a chronologist. I'm probably one of the last of my kind. I can and will defend the integrity of my chronographical studies with more sources than you're probably willing to follow. And I've done so in 230 videos on Facebook, 6 published books, maybe 7. Well, maybe my 7th book is also chronographical. I have many published books, but I have hundreds of posts on Facebook, and they're free. You don't have to pay anything. Go check them out. 230 videos are free. So, Zechariah Sitchin has erred in promoting Anunnaki history as it is purposely intended by him to be aligned with the anthropological theory of human development over hundreds of thousands of years. You Sitchinites so often claim the Sumerians said their gods did such and such hundreds of thousands of years ago, but it's not true. Translators said that. The original Sumerians did not. The Anunnaki phenomenon has turned what appear to be perfectly rational people into subjects of massive suspension of disbelief. Now, suspension of disbelief is what is necessary for someone to accept everything else as real. Many people who have read Zechariah Sitchin actually believe that the Sumerians only 5,000 years ago, writing on clay tablets, recorded historical events about what happened 450,000 years earlier. To believe this narrative, they have accepted that these Anunnaki figures themselves lived for 50 to 100,000 years long. So when I state, excuse me, but you do know that in all the representations and reliefs in ancient Sumerian and Babylonian iconography that the Anunnaki are always shown as bearded, right? I'm always met with silence. So the gods are bearded. That's cool. I can accept that. I personally cannot take seriously anyone who claims to have a modicum of education and yet tries to explain to me how people lived for tens of thousands of years. If you are of the opinion that 5,000 years ago, writing on clay tablets could have recorded anything that had happened 450,000 years previous, then you can be made to believe in anything. Your Netflix version of history will conform to every turn you need it to suspend your disbelief. You are a cultist, accepting unprovable and absolutely preposterous ideas as facts. you may as well cite your sources as Nickelodeon. And don't get angry at me. I did not present this series of falsehoods so as to convince you of their veracity. No, that was Zechariah Sitchin.
William Henson, in the book Discovering Ancient Giants, wrote concerning the Sumerian histories, quote, in text after text, whenever the starting point was recalled, it was always this: 432,000 years before the deluge, the Dingir, or the gods, came to earth. 432,000 is a number appearing in mythological systems around the world, according to Giorgio de Sant'Anna and Hertha von Deschon in the famous epic work Hamlet's Mill. In many of my videos, we have covered this 1200-year period from the descent of the Watchers in 3439 BC to the Great Flood in 2239 BC, which is exactly 432,000 days on the older Draconian calendar of 360 days a year. The precise amount of days that misinterpretation into years has several modern authors claiming that the Anunnaki descended 432,000 years before the flood. A ridiculous duration, because nothing that happened 500,000 years ago would ever be relevant to history after so long a span.
It is one of the more enigmatic of the Sumerian king lists that is the focus of this study in this video. A 4,000-year-old record of 8 kings that are very cryptically referred throughout all Euphratian text as the 7 kings, whose reign ended disastrously with the Great Flood. This 4,000-year-old text reads, when kingship was lowered from heaven, kingship was at Eridu. Eridu, Alulim, king, reigned 28,800 shars. Algar reigned 36,000 shars. 2 kings reigned at 64,000 shars. I dropped Eridu. Its kingship to Badtabira was carried. The shar is a unit of time that has absolutely perplexed scholars. Because historians have not detected any obvious reasons for asserting that the SHAR is anything other than a standard year, they have uniformly designated it as a year, effectively rendering Sumerian annals to the stuff of mythology. The SHAR year theory makes these kings to have lived lifespans of tens of thousands of years, absolutely untenable. Another very misunderstood aspect of these annals from Sumer, accentuating the problem of falsely assigning these records a mythological status, is that the Sumerians wrote that their kingship was dropped from heaven, as will be shown. This is a precise astronomical phenomenon experienced by the Sumerians that will prove astonishing in coming videos. The 8 kings and their reigns are as follows. 2 kings form the Eridu dynasty. Alulim, 28,000 shars. Algar, 36,000 shars. 3 kings formed the Badtabira dynasty. Enmenluana, 43,200 shars. Enmelgalana, 28,000 shars. Dumuzi, 36,000 shars. 1 king makes up the Leric dynasty. Insipisiana, 28,800 shars. 1 king reigned in the Sipar dynasty. Enmendarana, 21,000 shars. 1 king ruled in the final city of Shurapak. His name is Ubar Tutu, 18,600 shars. The Sumerian text reads, 5 cities were they, 8 kings reigned there, 241,000 shars. Then the flood swept over the earth. After the flood had swept thereover, when kingship was lowered from heaven, kingship was in Kish. The traditional conclusion of the SHAR year theory will lead the casual observer to conclude that these kings ruled successively for a period of 241,200 years, and that 1 king alone, Enmenluana, ruled 43,200 years by himself. This interpretation is simply untenable. Not only untenable, it is ridiculous. Now, with the SHAR being a single day, an evening and morning, the 241,200 shars of the Sumerian king list becomes 670 years. I'm going to repeat that again. It becomes 670 years because it's on a 360-day count, annular orbit. You simply divide 241,200 SHARs by the number of days in a year, 360, and you get 8 kings or 7 kings ruling 670 years.
And this is when the Sumerian story begins with the arrival of the Anunna. Now, the Babylonians said it was Oannes, and he came from the sea, but it's the same thing. It's during this period, we have the Olmec calendar begins in 3373 BC. Stonehenge 1 and Newgrange are constructed in 3163 BC. Enoch becomes an emperor at this period over 130 provinces. The Mayan Itza Temple of the Cross calendar begins in 3121 BC. They're all right here in this little period after this object appears and causes this great reset destruction. These are mentioned because these are all calendars, or they're associated to timekeeping systems. Many ancient megalithic monuments in the world were all attached to the idea of passages of time and how to monitor them. Then we come to this yellow area here. You see 3113 BC. This is in the smack dab middle of the Vapor Canopy period, the 1656 years of the pre-flood world. We have an impact event. North America, precisely in the Badlands of Montana, is a terrible impact event. Those who remained in the Americas that didn't flee with the rest of the Anunna were obliterated. If there were survivors, they did not survive as the Anunna. They were absorbed into other cultures that either enslaved them or ate them or whatever was going on in North America at the time. There's a long period of time in North America for which there is no settlements. There was nothing but just pure nature there. It was destroyed. The Mayan long count is purely an American calendar. It's in a countdown of 1,872,000 days, which is 13 Bactans of 144,000 days, to get to the date of 130000, which is the next impact event in North America in the year 2046. We'll get to that. It's over here in the end of this timeline. Now, just after this event, we have a continuation of this period when all these different cultures were creating new calendars. In 3103 BC, we have the beginning of the Vedic Kali Yuga Black Age calendar. And in 2909 BC, we have the 241,200 turnings of the Sumerian king list. That's right here where you see my little cursor moving. 241,200 turnings of the Sumerian king list it's been wildly misinterpreted by so many people, including Zechariah Sitchin, to be 241,200 years, but it's not true. It's just like the Chinese Dragon King chronology. The Dragon Kings ruled over the ancient Chinese. They're just like the 7 kings of the Anunnaki. They only ruled for 646 years in the Chinese version, but in the Sumerian version, they ruled for 241,200 turnings. Now, that's not years. Those are, you got to understand, the original calendar under the Vapor Canopy was a stellar calendar, and it was a matriarchal society. Turnings is how many times the stars turned around Alpha Draconis, the eye of the dragon, the ancient pole star before 2239 BC, altered the pole star to Ursa Minor. Now, the pole star here was the eye of the dragon, Alpha Draconis. All the stars every day surrounded one single turning of the deal was evening to morning. This is recorded in Genesis. The only timekeeping system back here was important was days. 241,200 days under the draconian calendar of 360 days a year was a very simple 670 years exactly, which comports to the Chinese Dragon King chronology, which is at the exact same time in history. So this chart right here, you can see Nemesis Cataclysm, Earth, Luna, Phoenix, Nemesis, Nemesis X object, Dark Satellite are catapulted towards Sol in 5239 BC. It takes 600 years for Earth to adopt its orbit right here in 4639 BC. It takes another 600 years for the Moon to appear right here. It takes another 600 years for Nemesis X object to appear right here. You have to understand, this precision is unnatural, but you cannot claim that I made up these dates. This 3439 BC date I've already shown in many other videos. Other chronologists come up with these dates. I'm talking about precisely this date. So this wasn't me. Now, the Phoenix dates. This is 138 year Phoenix periodicity is right here. Every single one of these little boxes right here is 138 years going all the way to the year May 16th, 2040. It's right here. Now, here's the 930 years of Civilization X. I know that Civilization X, these 930 years, refers to the Anunna civilization that was thriving. When the Nemesis Cataclysm occurred, I don't know where this civilization, maybe it was on Earth. Maybe that explains why we have all these underground facilities from the ancient world that we just can't survive. 60 cities in ancient Turkey have been found all underground. Were the Anunna hiding underground during this Ice Age period when Earth was catapulted 600 years through space between stars? I don't know. I just know that I'm a chronologist, and all this makes sense in the historical record. I've already cataloged all my source materials and show where all this came from. I just have a problem with the fact that it's too perfect. Here's 4639 BC, Earth is captured in the Sol orbit. 4309 BC is the first contact between Earth and the Phoenix since the Nemesis Cataclysm. These are cursed Earth periods right here. You see them in red. They're 414 years. This is 138 times 3. It's 3 Phoenix orbits, each 414 years, all the way here to the year 2040. It's so bizarre. The cursed Earth system isn't my invention. Biblical chronologist Stephen Jones, who employed the Assyrian eponyms and the Book of Jasher, the Book of Jubilees, the biblical chronomarkers, he put together his own chronology of the ancient world. And in his chronology, he has some of these exact dates. He has the date for the flood at 2239 BC, which is entirely different analysis than me. He has the sun darkening earthquake episode that happened in 1687 BC, happened exactly then. He's got 3895 BC as year 1 of the pre-flood world. You can't make this stuff up. His research is absolutely independent of my own, and yet they 100% comport with each other. So he came up with the cursed Earth system because he noticed, having no knowledge of Phoenix or the 138-year orbit or none of that, he believes that Earth is patterned in episodes of 414 years, and he's documented probably close to 60 or 70 of those periods, and it's very interesting. This is just 414 in linear fashion all the way to the end of the Phoenix chronology. Now, we get to the Great Flood, and it's in the month of May, which in the ancient world's calendar was the second month. It's the 1656 year of the pre-flood world. It is 1656 Annus Mundi. The flood is caused by the Phoenix, which in the ancient Sumerian records is called Apen. Now, the cataclysm at this time is confirmed by Dr. Barry Wormkessel, who calls it Vulcan. The deluge predicted and told to Noah, to Manu, to Anapishtim, to I can't even pronounce it, Zasudra, Bokika. The antediluvian period is now over. The vapor canopy collapses due to Phoenix, and it is now, according to the ancients, the birth of the sun. The Heliolithic age begins. The mandate of heaven in China completely changes. A new star appears. Hundreds of cities are shoved undersea. There is a worldwide volcanism, continental quakes and mud floods, red rains and cosmic dust fallout. There is a temporal pole shift and a really good description of what happened in the Book of Jasher. So we have this epic cataclysm. This was 3,000 years of history. These 4 charts that I showed you in the beginning of the video. We just covered this 3,000 years of history. And remember, Theopompus and others in ancient times said that there was a 3,000-year period in the ancient world where gods contended with each other. That too is very interesting. 3,000 is a very definite number. So, I really don't know how to explain this almost perfect synchronicity outside the context of a simulation theory. So, this 3,000 years is just, it's too perfect. That events that would happen, that would transpire this way, it's just so unusual that every 600 years something happens that's relative to the two stars and the bodies that orbit them. Yet that's only relative up to the flood. And the Chinese regarded the flood as a great division in time itself. Okay, well this may be a clue, because the 600-year periods continue unabated. They are thematic, and we're going to get to them in this video. But what was happening during those 600-year periods is not the same after the flood. Now it becomes a narrative of great personalities and heroes and things like that. It's not about worlds and planets anymore. Something's changed. So we have arrived to the great flood of antiquity. Just in this little small area, just tiny, I can't even separate it with the cursor because the area is so small. But just in this tiny little area, we have 2233 BC, which is the start of Babylon's astronomical records according to Callisthenes. We have 2200 BC as the Great Flood according to Roman Marcus Varro, a historian. And in the Frisian Oralind manuscript, fascinating text, we have the date for the Great Flood at 2194 BC. It is also right here. We can't separate it from this black line. That's how close it is. In 2179 BC is the flood date of the Toltec records. 2137 BC is the date the Chinese give for the cataclysm involving a sun darkening. 2100 BC is the start date for reliable Near East dating according to academia. What this means is all these different cultures and civilizations dated the Great Flood at this period of time. That they could get it narrowed down to this area is awesome. It's fantastic. That we have it so precise is for different chronological reasons. I have an entire video about the Great Flood showing 21 different ways to measure what year it happened. And it's 2239 BC. So it's profound that so many different cultures all dated this Great Flood at this period. And an interesting aside is I know there's a whole school of thought who follow Graham Hancock and all his followers and copyists, all these guys that have published these famous books where they're all copying about Atlantis and how the Great Flood was in 10,000 BC and all. You can't support none of these authors have ever supported that theory with any actual historical, textual, basically ancient writers. They have to ignore all the ancient chronographers in order to promote that theory. I cite those theories. Like I just cited right now. I just cite all these different authors, and there's many more. You go watch my video or read my published books, you'll find many more other authors who basically knew the general time of the Great Flood. In order to promote the Plato version, 9,000 BC or 9,000 years, 9,500 BC and all that, they have to ignore a tremendous amount of historical data and hyperinflate years when the Egyptians were providing them lunar dates. Yeah, the Egyptian Atlantis cataclysm was only the 14th or 15th century BC because it was lunar reckoning. They were supposed to divide everything by 12 or 13, and ancient authors mention this. They critique Plato. But Graham Hancock and many others, just like him, man, they ignore all this to promote these fantastic theories.
The ancient Frisian Oralind manuscript reads that before the Great Flood cataclysm, quote, the years were not counted, unquote. This is why the oldest dating systems are in the hundreds of thousands of days. The Sumerian records, the King's List, the Vedic, the Olmec, the early Egyptian, the Mayan Temple of the Cross, the Mayan long count calendars, every single one of them share the same common denominator, that the units of time that were measured were days and that years had no significance. It was the turning of the stellosphere, and they did not reckon the years. 270 years ago, a chronologist named John Jackson wrote Antiquities and Chronology of the Most Ancient Kingdoms from the Creation of the World for the space of 5,000 years in 3 volumes. This is what he wrote. But perceiving that these large numbers of years were uniformly carried on and made use of by the most judicious and learned ancient writers, without any intimation or suspicion made by them that they were fabulous, I judged that they were founded on real and true calculations, and only differed from those other nations in the manner of reckoning, and not in the chronology itself. And I found at last with great satisfaction that the most ancient computation of days for years amongst the Chaldeans, and of months for years amongst the Egyptians, warranted by the testimony of writers of the greatest credit, the most conversant in the histories and antiquities of these nations, reconciled all their accounts together, made them consistent with the course of nature and the history of the first ages of the world. And here we have it, from a learned man 270 years ago, relying on the ancient testimonies of older scholars and books and chronographers. Here we have it, that the Chaldeans, which is representative of the Babylonians and Sumerians and Akkadians, measured time not in years, but in days. As many of you know, I have shown multiple data sets that conclude that May 2239 is the date of when the sky fell, the collapse of the Vapor Canopy, the great flood of the biblical narrative, and so many other ancient traditions. And as with the Phoenix phenomenon, the dating of Atlantis, the misinterpretation of the SHARs, I am also willing to debate anyone on any platform concerning the dating, the chronography of the Great Flood, because it too is a matter of importance. But completely independent of the dating of the flood, this chart shows something very phenomenal, because this chart demonstrates that ancient authors and historians and chronologers had absolutely dated to the exact same period a series of events involving Babylonian history, but some of them used years and some of them used the day count system of the ancient Chaldeans and Sumerians instead of the modern interpretation of the SHAR, meaning year. This is profound. First example is 2234 BC is the date Callisthenes got for the start of Babylon, and the observations going back 1,903 years before 331 BC in the days of Alexander, when Alexander the Great sat down on the throne of Babylon. Callisthenes was his personal historian, his friend, and I believe also akin to him. Later he had Callisthenes executed, but that's neither here nor there. Now this is the source, Rawlinson, 1873, who cites Simplicus and Porphyry. But Callisthenes had access to the records of Babylon. In Babylon, saw that they had these impossible numbers and still interpreted those impossible numbers to only going back 1,903 years. How this was possible is evident in the next examples. Berosus and Crittodemus wrote the duration of the Babylonian astronomical observations found on tablets in Babylon showed that their history covered 490,000 years. Or was it? because they themselves calculated this impossible number of 490,000 units of time since the Babylonians began their history to a mere 1,361 years from the beginning of the appearance of Oannes. This would have been Ea or Enoch in 3439 BC. This targets 2077 BC. Here is another example of ancient writers dividing those impossible numbers found in the cuneiform by a factor of days, not years. Another example is that Epigenes, according to Pliny the Elder, taught that the Babylonian astronomical observations dated back 720,000 years. However, this was interpreted as 2,000 years and going back only to 2240 BC. The Sumerian king list says that after the flood, the first dynasty of Kish was 23 kings, ruling for 24,510 SHARs, or just 68 years. This means the first dynasty of Kish ended in 2171 BC. Remember, Babylon was built during the Kish dynasty. Further, we can't accept a date of 24,510 years after the Great Flood, because this would defy all ancient chronological records, putting the Great Flood at 21,000 BC. It's not possible. We have no written records beyond the 35th century BC. It's an anachronism. Also, the next example is Philolethes. According to the chronologist Stephen, dated Semiramis II, a queen, to the period of the Trojan War, and that Babylon was built 1,002 years earlier from the fall of Troy. Now this was 1,002 years before the fall of Troy in 1229 BC is 2231 BC. In my Chronicon, I show you the amount of data we have to date the fall of Troy to 1229 BC. I am not the only historian to date it precisely to that year. At the bottom, we have another dating using the same queen, Semiramis II. On the bottom of the chart, you will see Semiramis II, dated by Herodotus 520 years before the Assyrian revolt in 712 BC, when Sargon II was killed. 520 years plus 712 BC is 1232 BC, or the 7th year of the Trojan War, which lasted 10 years. Thus, 1,002 years of Philo gives us 2234 BC. We are bullseyeing this one area right there around the Great Flood and a few years right after it. The next example is from Eratosthenes, the chief librarian, the steward of the Alexandrian library. He had a record of 38 Theban kings, and the 37th king of Egyptian Thebes, according to Deciphering, at the end of the Trojan War, was 1,008 years after the first year of Menes, king of Egypt. So 1229 BC, fall of Troy, plus 1,008 years is 2237 BC. Look at the bullseye in the center of the chart. These are different chronologers in different time periods, recording by both the year system and the day count system, and they accurately got the exact same dates. So, I'm not going to bog you down with any more details, but I will also educate you that I posted on YouTube today that Denis Diderot, also 270 years ago, further published additional data showing that these impossible lengths of time found in Babylonian cuneiform were in fact turnings of the stars equaling one day. They are not years. Therefore, we have we have a problem. We have millions of people being miseducated by a few people across YouTube with popular books and popular notions, dynamic personalities, all of them together, networking together, talking about falsified versions of history, no different than the falsified version put out by Graham Hancock, Randall Carlson, and all those other authors that have put this out. Guys, I'm not going to war against the establishment. We all know these people are puppets, and we know they're putting out deliberate misinformation. Nobody can be this uneducated, not when they have read the same materials that I have. So we have to draw a different conclusion as to what's really happening here. No, Jason of Archaics is not on the warpath to go demon chasing against all these disinfo agents, but that's exactly what they are. It's what I'm calling them. The very fact that not one has come up and wanted to debate this in public is very telling. And it should open your eyes as to what's really going on. In Archaics, I promise you're going to get the most accurate information in the historical record that I can provide, and what I believe, and what I can show in bibliographic citations, guys. But I've got one more video to show you just how prolific this disinformation is. I opted not to show faces like I did with Graham Hancock in the prior video, because when it comes to the misinformation on the Zechariah Sitchin version of ancient history, even Zechariah Sitchin isn't truly to blame when Berosus and Manetho made the same exact mistakes. And they did that 2,000 years ago, which was 18 centuries after the text that they were examining. Therefore, the mistake is understandable, although it still defies all logic to believe in time periods that long that have any relativity whatsoever. So the mistakes are ancient. They've been corrected here in Archaics. Let's see how the community responds to this. Will it be crickets, or are there people big enough out there to actually come to the table and begin networking so we can put the pieces of the past together as accurately as possible and put these false chronologies behind us?